He said to me, "You're trying to make people happy. You're trying to keep the sponsors happy and the sport happy." He goes, "Forget all that." He goes, "You have to make the movie you want to make, to be honest to yourself. And you may fail, but make your movie and don't care what anybody thinks. Free yourself from those expectations."
Paul Taublieb and Noah Taublieb. Welcome to The Creative Drive, where we talk about all things automotive and creative. Paul, you're a Emmy-winning filmmaker renowned for your work in action sports and motorsports. Thanks for coming, guys.
Thank you for having us. It's a big honor. I mean, this is, the magazine has such prestige and intelligence about it. To be part of that is a big honor. So we're very excited.
Awesome. We're very happy that you're here. Well, first of all, you're from Malibu. You guys are in Malibu. How has the fire been for you guys?
It's been disturbing. We're actually evacuated now. We do know a few people who've lost their homes in Malibu and Pacific Palisades. And, we're in a mode right now where it's still unsettling, because the fire's still going and the electricity is not on and so on and so forth. So we're sort of still up in the air a little bit. Yep. And there's a sense, just from what we've all read, that the landscape of Los Angeles and that part of Los Angeles is going to be forever changed. You don't lose that many households and not really have a fundamental shift. So it's a little unnerving.
Yeah, obviously it's been devastating. We were just talking right now before the podcast that, as you say, it's going to take decades to rebuild, and it's going to affect probably more people than even just the people who were that had to evacuate and were directly affected by it. And, our thoughts and prayers go out to everyone, and thanks to the first responders and everyone
absolutely.
Who's been involved in having to help people out, right? And I've seen a lot of the city get together and come together through this as well, and that's been encouraging through this experience.
Most people don't realize Malibu is kind of a small town. It has a reputation. It's a certain type of people, but you really do get to know your neighbors. You do band together. We've been through fires before. This one does feel different. We were kind of fortunate because we were in either West or we call North Malibu, and there had been a fire, ironically, about 3 weeks ago that created a big burn scar. And so as the fire was coming north or west, it hit that burn scar, and otherwise it would have burned through all of Malibu. So
right.
A previous challenging situation at this point was kind of helpful to us, but that's where we're at.
And you're in Point Dume, right, which is on the west side of PCH.
Yeah.
So you actually have sort of a bit of a border, I guess, from the mountains.
Yeah. Where the mountains are right behind us.
Yeah.
But it's Malibu Canyon was kind of where the last big fire was, and we're right near Canaan, where Canaan hits Pacific Coast Highway.
Right.
Great road to drive.
Right.
Both roads,
beautiful
Canyon roads.
Right.
When they're open.
Yeah.
Yeah, and right now PCH is closed, and how long is it going to be closed? I mean, when you look at that devastation along Pacific Coast Highway and the homes to be built, I mean, who knows? It's an unknown.
Yeah. And Noah, did you grow up in that area too then?
I did.
Yeah.
I was born and raised in Malibu. I did leave for a while to the Seattle area for school, and I've done a little bits of traveling here and there to visit family who live in like New York or at one point Sweden, but that's a whole thing.
Uh-huh.
But no, born and raised, and now I work in the area.
And you work at the production company?
Taublieb Films.
Right.
Taublieb Films.
Right.
And what do you do for Taublieb Films?
For Taublieb Films, I am a sound designer and video editor. I create original music and sound design for the various projects, such as paydirt, which has a number of original pieces and sounds I made. I also am the social media guy. I cut clips from the movie, and then edit different parts of it together and then format them for social media to fit the 9:16 aspect ratio and subtitles, logos, all that.
Nice. I'll have a bunch of questions for you later on creating social media clips and whatnot. But Paul, let's go back to just backtrack a little bit. How did you get into film production and directing, and how did you get into filmmaking?
It came through being a writer, actually. I worked at magazines, newspapers, and everything I do is kind of word-driven. It's what's exciting to me at Racer, because I understand what putting a magazine together is. I worked for the Washington Post and Village Voice, as well as my background really is in action sports and surfing. So I wrote for Surfer Magazine. That's how I got my career started. So it was as a writing background, and then I started doing, when video came along, VHS tapes came along, I started doing some original content there. And that just kind of moved into producing all kinds of different things. And my first feature documentary, which is kind of what I'm known for, was about MotoGP. And I knew nothing about it. And another filmmaker came to me. We worked closely with Monster Energy. At that time, Valentino Rossi was their lead writer. And I didn't even know what MotoGP was really. I mean, I was aware of it. And we did a video called Fastest. That still continues to be seen around the world. It was about MotoGP as a whole, but specifically about Valentino. So that began my career in long-form feature documentaries.
I see. And you're part of the creation of X Games as well. Right?
Yep. Because of my background in action sports, based and through surfing, when I was a little kid, my parents took me to see The Endless Summer. And I was a swimmer. And even though I had sort of this existential angst over going back and forth in a pool, and at the end of the day, I kept going, but I haven't gone anywhere. I'm back where I started. It used to bother me as a little kid. And then I saw surfing, and I thought, wow. And at the time, I was a young kid, 6, 7 years old. My father was a CPA. My mother sold insurance. And I saw this Endless Summer. And to them, anybody over 12 was a grown-up. Right. And I thought, well, I'll travel around the world and surf. That's the same thing as being an accountant. I didn't know that it was a different world. And in those days, surfing was kind of a strange activity. So that's what got me inspired to get into surfing. And my background as a swimmer, I was comfortable in the ocean. And so from surfing, that led into action sports, and you mentioned a company before called Video Action Sports. I got involved with them. I had a partner who was affiliated with ESPN, and a guy came to me at ESPN. We had the Video Action Sports catalog, and this executive there named Ron Semio said, could we take this catalog and put it on TV? And I said, well, it's not going to be that easy. First of all, none of the music was cleared in any of those videos in those days. I said, but what if we created, he said, well, what can we do? I go, what if we made these different things you see in all these action sports videos into a competition? And that was kind of the birth of the X Games. And then later I got involved with Freestyle Motocross, which also led to one of my films. And we ended up running the X Games, and I did that for 16 years all over the world. My own events, X Games events. So I really was there at the birth and the growth of the X Games.
So when you went to ESPN about the X Games, and they said, "Okay, let's go for it." Were you involved in the promotion and the running of the entire event, or just creating content? And which part of it were you exactly?
My role initially, my first role was actually I wrote the white paper that was the foundation of the X Games. At the time I didn't even know what the word white paper meant, but I did that, and I remember it was about 120 pages, and they wanted everything. It was ESPN, very formal, so we covered everything. They said, "We'll put it around the world sailing," and I remember saying to these executives, "That doesn't fit the culture. Now it may be extreme in a dictionary definition, but you've missed the mark." And then we finally, honed in on skateboarding, surfing, and there were some odd ones. There was shovel racing. In those days, the executives didn't quite grasp the idea. They had skydiving competitions, and I kept saying, it's not going to work. And eventually those things fell aside. And then I did all that, and then I wasn't involved for the first X Games. But then someone called me and said, you've got to look at this video called Crusty Demons of Dirt. And I looked at it, and I was blown away by it. And it was like a surf movie, except it was motocross, freestyle motocross. And I thought I could take this and put it in a competition format, similar to what existed in snowboarding and skateboarding, with a run. And then I came up with different ideas like the step-up competition, which they don't do anymore, jumping over a bar, and a freestyle run, like a 90-second run. So I developed that. Then I became what was called a sport organizer. So I ran everything with motorcycles and two wheels. Later, many years later, I did the rally that they brought into the X Games for a period of time. So my job was mainly more like being NASCAR, not the network. Excuse me. But my involvement, obviously, because I'm really a storyteller is my real basis, it was taking the sports and how do we make them dramatic. I worked with all the different riders, and that led later to my film called Unchained, the Untold Story of Freestyle Motocross, which is one of the films I won an Emmy for, about the story of freestyle motocross and how I came along and Krusty came along and eventually was part of X Games.
And Yes, was that on ESPN2 or which network was at the beginning?
When the X Games launched, I believe it was both ESPN and ESPN2, but it was really ESPN2 they were trying to populate. They had this new network, and they thought, oh, we could fill it with all this crazy young type stuff. And that's where X Games sort of was born.
I see. Yeah. That was, I remember, the step up, Ronnie Renner, right?
Yes, that's right.
I remember
the funny story there was when I said, I got this idea because I saw step up in the natural terrain where they would jump up to a plateau. Yeah. I said, well, what if it was a bar? And this was in Costa Mesa, the Costa Mesa Speedway. We ran our first event in 1998. And I said, I got this idea, guys. You'll jump over a bar. And they go, that's the worst idea I ever heard. Nobody will like that. And so at the time we were primitive. We had a little nub jump and the crowd went crazy. And Ronnie Renner and a guy named Tommy Tomcat Clowers, they just loved it. Right. And it took off. And for many years, it was one of the highest rated events and became very spectacular as the years went by.
Right. And they did something at Vegas too. Were you?
I wasn't involved in that. I didn't work at Vegas, but that was one of the first events. That's how I got to meet Travis Pastrana and all those guys and eventually made the movie Unchained.
How was, so you were sort of like a promoter organizer. How was that different to, creating content though?
I will tell you this, of all the things I've done, putting butts in seats is the hardest thing that I've ever done and basically failed at. I can tell a story, I can put an event, I can make a TV show, but that concept of motivating people to go from their homes and doing marketing and understanding the finance of that, we had some sellouts, we had some big booming events, we had some that didn't work, we had all kinds of crazy stories with dirt not working, fog coming in. So I really admire the Felds of the world, the NASCARs of the world, the Indy cars, people who run a sport to get people to come and see it. I was pretty naive about it. I thought, oh, put on an event, people just show up. Well, that's not the case. And so eventually I transitioned more into the storytelling than being a promoter. Promoter's too hard for me.
So you used to be a writer, you said, and that became, visual storytelling.
Yep.
Was that transition easy for you?
It kind of was, because I said, take this same idea of structure of a story. Why do people care? How do I put that into a live event? And that's what kind of distinguished me. And to this day, that's kind of what distinguishes what I do. So even when I do something that has a live event component, it's what's the story? How do I make these pieces come together and then have the visual content reflect it? Now, again, these days, I'm not as involved in the live event business anymore, again, because it's so difficult. But, everything I do is sort of based on the written word. And then I did work, in the magazine business for a while. Like I said, I was at Us Magazine and People Magazine and, writing articles for newspapers. So everything is, you got to write it down first.
Right. When you're talking about an event and you want to create a story from the event, how do you structure the drama, for example? How do you bring those stories out? Where are you looking at to create these stories?
In the event world, it's a little bit different. But it's kind of like documentary filmmaking, as I found out later on. You set a structure up. We're going to have this, how many runs, how many races, how the judging is going to work. And then you follow the story that develops. And that's the beauty of live events. You don't really know the outcome. That's why we watch live events. So the key is having the right judges, the right course, the writers, and setting it up, and then having the storytelling built in advance. Who are these characters? And then as you see it develop, it's no different than being a reporter and going out, oh, here's the story. Here's what I'm looking for. So it's building a structure, and then the story evolves within it. And hopefully it's a good event and you have a lot of excitement and you have a good ending.
Growing up in a household where your dad's, producing X Games and creating all this cool content, were you just was it normal for you, or did you actually think your dad was cool? My son doesn't think that I'm cool, no matter what I do.
Well, that's a shame. Look at this nice podcast. Yeah, I hope he's watching it right now.
Questionable.
Growing up in this household was like having the opportunity to get way ahead of everyone else in my field, with the caveat of you have to start working when you're 12. So, which I wouldn't trade for the world, for the record. But it was we're a very workaholic family. We're type A to the max. I feel like I inherited that from my father. And so I was starting to write music for some of the projects when I was when I was 12, I got started. I think my first big break I got to work on something called Blink of an Eye, a story about Michael Waltrip, and I got to write an original piece for the scene. And
cool.
I can let him describe the movie he made, but the gist of the scene I got to compose for was, he's a racer who races over 460 races, loses all of them, and I won't spoil too much about what happens surrounding that, but I got to write for this devastating scene, and I kind of took that and went into, and I took the inspiration and all the everything I learned, and I kind of went into freelance, but I just took that sort of emotion, I tried to run with it.
Yeah, nice. I mean, it's you're lucky.
I'm not easy on him, by the way.
Did you push him into 10-foot waves when he was 4 years old? Is that
I have 3 sons, and the 2 older ones are a little more into surfing. He's not as much into it, but I did make him tough on him to say, if your content is going to be in my movie, it's going to have to be good. And it's exciting to collaborate with your own son.
Yeah. So your documentaries are more about personal stories than the sport itself, I feel like. So how do you build trust and rapport with your subjects to tell their stories authentically?
A lot of people say, I've had many people ask, hey, could you show me your questions in advance? And I've said, well, I would, but I don't have them. I usually have an idea. I think the secret of interviewing, and I'm not the only one to say this, is listening. And I don't believe in making subjects comfortable. My style is to make a set with really bright lights. And one thing I found, particularly for motorsports people, is I make sure that I have a makeup person. And these people have never had makeup put on as a rule.
Yeah.
And they find it very off-putting and odd.
Okay.
They kind of like it though. But it tells them that we're in a theater. This is theatrical.
I see.
And I want them to get a sense of this is really important. Kind of like this podcast. It's there's lights and I feel like I'm under the spotlight and, it's not a normal sitting on the couch watching TV thing.
Right.
And I like to create that environment. And then it's about really listening. The other secret is time. The interviews will often last 2, 3, 4 hours. Part of that's wearing people down a little bit. And a lot of it is just listening and talking and talking. Having a base of knowledge is very helpful because, you know kind of what to ask.
Right.
But I'm always looking for the things that are not really racing related, but it's how you take the human story. And the thing about racing is you're naked. You're out there, you win, you lose, your personality, your character becomes revealed. They say, someone said, sports don't make character, they reveal character. And racing is naked. Did you get, are you willing to go deeper into the turn or not?
Yeah.
And whatever form it is. So I try to find that and really get into what drives the person. And I seem to have a little bit of an ability to pull it out of people.
The creative drive. That's why we call it the creative drive.
Yeah.
The third meaning of this, the creative drive. What was it like working with Michael Waltrip and Dale Earnhardt Jr.?
That was a really, really interesting project, A Blink of an Eye. Michael is an interesting character. When we did the movie Blink of an Eye, I'm not quite sure how many years had passed since Dale's death, but it was quite a number of years. And I had kind of thought, okay, it's a long time later. And you know how we process things and then sort of you get rote answers. Michael's a very emotional person, almost childlike in some ways. And his growing up and his relationship with his brother and his relationship with Dale was really emotional for him. And he is like I said, he's very childlike. And so the trauma of Dale's death really affects him, so much so that one day we were doing interviews and we did about maybe 2 days of 6 hours, 7 hours a day of interviews with him because that was the foundation of the piece. And one day he came to the set and we were interviewing Richard Petty, who was an instrumental person in Michael's career. And I went out to my car, the rental car, and there was Michael in the parking lot crying by himself. Because in bringing up all these feelings, you would think a decade later, you'd have sort of processed it and put it into boxes. Right. But Michael's not like that. He wears his heart on his sleeve. So he was very nervous. He was apprehensive because the story was so important to him. And, we come from really different worlds. I'm a guy from New York. He's a guy from Owensboro, Kentucky. And I wouldn't say that we exactly clicked on a really emotional level, but he knew I was serious. He knew I wanted to hear the real story.
Yeah.
And so it was very rewarding for him. And in that case in particular, Michael's life and career was changed by that movie. And one of the more emotional moments for me was we did one of the premieres was in the NASCAR Hall of Fame.
Mm-hmm.
And Michael's marriage, which takes place during his story, later his marriage fell apart. And his ex-father-in-law came up to me after the screening and said, I want to thank you. I was always really mad at Michael for the way the marriage to my daughter didn't work out. He goes, but now I understand that Michael had really been hurt by what happened with Dale. And emotionally, it affected him so much that he goes, I understand the guy better. And that was one of as a filmmaker, you kind of look for those moments when people respond to your work.
Right.
And it was seeing somebody having much more empathy for Michael, having seen what he went through, because Michael did lay it on the line. He really did give us the real story. So it was a really interesting project. I say about that project, I was given a home run. I had to run the bases. Paydirt was a much more difficult project because it didn't have, this had a perfect structure.
Yeah.
You know, the guy comes in, he's got a brother, he's got, the parents dynamic, the Dale Earnhardt dynamic. Dale had his problem with his son, which is part of that story. Right. Michael had the problem with his brother, who then is calling the race. And then, Dale dies, and then Dale Jr. comes back to win it, and Michael pushes him. It had all the Shakespearean elements. I just had to make sure that I did my job. Whereas some of the other movies I've had, like Paydirt, my new movie, was much more difficult to do because I didn't have the built-in structure. Mm-hmm. By the way, on Blink of an Eye, I'm working with a producer now named Roger Birnbaum and another producer named Eric Paquette to turn that into a feature film.
Okay.
We've been working on it for a little while, and we're putting some elements together, and because it is a natural movie, and I'm very confident that one day we're going to make that into a big Hollywood movie.
Cool. I can't wait to see that one. So let's talk about Paydirt, right? The story of Supercross. Can I read to you something?
Sure.
That Paul Fanner wrote on racer.com. His presence on screen evoked a visceral reaction in me, taking me back to moans of fear and unease from decades ago. I was around Mike Goodwin in 1974 when he was a Formula Ford customer of the racing business I work for. Those early encounters left an indelible mark on me, and seeing his aged face and hearing his unmistakable voice again in Paydirt brought those primal reactions flooding back. Paul Fanner. So that's the opening scene, right?
Yep.
You open with him.
Yep.
Why did you open with Mike Goodwin?
I guess there's two answers to the question. One is, it's a cool hook. I mean, how many movies about racing can start with a murder?
Yeah.
So part of my job is to entertain people. The other thing is, Mike Goodwin created the sport of Supercross. There's no dispute about it. Nobody will debate it. And so how do you tell the story of Supercross without telling Mike Goodwin's story? And one of the stories that didn't get into the movie, because you end up killing a lot of your babies, as they say, he took his girlfriend, who he wanted to propose to Carlsbad Raceway, where he had been racing. And he said, look, I want to show you what I do, and I think I want to promote these kind of races. And his girlfriend, who later became his wife, is dressed in a beautiful dress and high heels, and he proposes to her. And she goes, I accept your proposal of marriage on one condition. You never bring me back to a track where I have to go to a porta potty and my dress gets dirty and I'm walking around in high heels. So the light bulb went off. He goes, well, if I move this sport to stadiums, my wife can come and see what I do. And along with some other elements, that's what was really the birth of the sport of Supercross. Dealing with Mike has been very interesting. It's kind of strange because I would get phone calls at all times of the day and night, because he would get in line to make a phone call in prison, and all of a sudden the phone rings and you're driving along in your car, you hit the button, hello, you got a call from the correctional facility, and there's Mike Goodwin on the phone, and he's not changed. He's hustling, trying to get me on his side, and can we reopen his case? And I said to him, look, we are not here to adjudicate what happened to you. That's not this movie. Now, there may be another project in the future about Mike Goodwin's story, but that's not Paydirt. But I did feel it was important that his story was told. And we spent quite a bit of time on the phone with him, and he loves to call, and he would call my assistant, and I would get legal documents. Please read this. And friends of Mike Goodwin have called and made his case, and can you please help Mike with this and that? And again, I said, look, I'm not here. I'm not doing the serial podcast.
Right.
and I also was afraid as I worked on the project, what's the tail and what's the dog? Because like any storyteller, a juicy murder is lots of fun, but I go, that's not what I'm here to do. I'm here to tell the story of Supercross, but it starts with Mike Goodwin. So we're thrilled to have him in the movie. One story I can tell you, that I may be speaking out of school here, and it's the first time I've mentioned this publicly. One day I get this phone call. This guy goes, hey, I'm here to help you with Mike, and do you have any questions for Mike, or how can I help him, and what would you like? And I have this very pleasant conversation. And then he calls back again, and the guy's delightful. So finally he goes, I spoke to Mike the other day. And I go, well, wait a second. How do you talk to Mike so often? He goes, oh, I'm in prison. I have a phone. I go, so what do you have a phone? So there was a prisoner who was in prison with him.
Snuck a phone in?
Who had snuck a phone in. And he would call me, and he would, and then we would chat, and he would give me information and talk to me. And then one day, and I could text him. Wow. And one day I would text him, oh, could you ask Mike, to talk about this or that? And then one day he disappeared. So to this day, I don't actually know what happened. But for a little while, we were communicating through a prisoner.
Well, maybe they just took his phone away.
More than likely.
Right. Yeah. Wow. Interesting. What were some of the other storylines that you follow in paydirt? Because it's not just about Mike and
well, the thing with paydirt, and I want to mention the key to how it got done has to do with Josh Brolin, our narrator. Now, Josh and I made a few movies together. We have a friendship business relationship. I mean, I don't go to birthday parties for his kids, but we know each other. And Josh had done some other movies. And my initial concept was to follow the model of Unchained, the one I did about freestyle motocross, a fairly linear story. And if you look at the sport of Supercross, you had Bob Hanna, and then you had Ricky Johnson, you had Jeremy McGrath, and you had Ricky. So it kind of had a natural flow of each era. But as I put that together, and I literally put an edit together that was fairly linear, and I go, this is boring. This is a racing story. This is not human. So I was kind of lost. And you're spending money and you're editing. And I'm going, but it's not working. I knew it wasn't working. And I called up Josh, and he had already agreed to narrate it. Excuse me. And his advice to me was, he said to me, you're trying to make people happy. You're trying to keep the sponsors happy and the sport happy. He goes, forget all that. He goes, you have to make the movie you want to make, to be honest to yourself. And you may fail, but make your movie and don't care what anybody thinks. Free yourself from those expectations. And it was really hard because I had Monster as a sponsor. They're a big part of the sport. I had met all these people. Feld was involved, and I know they're, like any brand, they want to protect their brand. So I had them in my mind every second. And he says, forget them. And I could use a pejorative, like, screw them. So I went back and said, okay, I'm going to do a different movie. And so that began this, and I thank Josh for giving me that confidence. And he was like, look, you've made a bunch of movies. If this one sucks, it sucks. That's the way it goes. You have to live with that. But you will fail for sure if you try to please other people. Please yourself. And so that's when I came up with this different format to go into a thematically driven thing that was not driven by a timeline. At the same time, because my background as a writer is about structure, you do need to have something, like I'm sure when you put a magazine together, you're thinking, this is the right article to open with. This is in the middle of the book. This is the end. There's that flow. And a movie is all about that structure. Yeah. So we were lucky. We had Mike Goodwin to start it in the LA Coliseum. And I knew I had an ending with the young rider and Danger Boy Deegan back at the Coliseum. So I said, okay, I can bookend this thing. And so it's not just rambling. The other beauty about Josh Brolin is, as I wanted to connect these vignettes, basically, or these pods, I could write a script to have Josh pull us through. And he's so good, and he gets it. So it was a matter of now coming, okay, what are these themes? So we have things about rivalry, about dirt, about the privateer, about Loretta Lynn's. So it's kind of disjointed. It's not linear, but I felt it was like a jigsaw puzzle. That it's all different pieces. If you put them all together, it's not the history of Supercross, as we say, it's the story. So that's kind of how I went about it. And it's kind of a stew, and hopefully the ingredients come together, which is all obviously in the eye of the beholder, not mine.
Yeah, I got to go to Anaheim this past weekend to see Supercross. The sport has really grown significantly, obviously, and the place was packed. The Anaheim Stadium was completely packed. How do you?
Sorry, I just wanted to add to that, kind of like, because on my experience handling the social media editing side, kind of like, I sort of it was interesting in that I took the same approach, but reverse engineered. And like for Paul, it was like taking all the jigsaw pieces, putting it together. Loretta Lynn's, like sections about privateers. My job was to literally take this puzzle piece that was taken together and break it apart again. Yeah. But it's not as simple as just taking a raw export of a 2-minute clip from the movie, because one, social media, various factors have to have very specific lengths of time. So at time constraints, and sometimes you want to get multiple themes across. For example, I did a clip about Jimmy Button, where doing that, I first had to introduce who Jimmy Button was, and I had to inform what happened to him. He had a horrible accident, and then I had to talk about, but I had to demonstrate that he had to recover, and then he made the Road to Recovery Foundation to help other people went through what he went through, and I had to do all of this in the span. I had to take, I want to say, 10 minutes of footage and narrow it down to about 1.5 minutes of the most important parts.
Yeah. What do you look for when you're looking for those clips that, would get the most engagement or would get the most attention?
Emotional beats and a storyline. So again, going back to the Jimmy Button one, I saw a beginning, a middle, and end. Beginning, Jimmy Button, great racer. Middle, horrible accident, or bottom of the second act. Hurts himself horribly. And off a relatively minuscule accident that, because these tiny things on the road can, break you. And then, you need the recovery. You need him feeling better. But so I took the clip where it's like, with the footage of him getting his feet and legs massaged, or like working them out, or tapping his knee, trying to get the feeling in his hands again. And then you have to relieve that tension a bit. So I have footage of him riding a bike, talking about his foundation. And so it's kind of like, I don't want to say or actually sort of like a hero's journey, go on an adventure, gets challenged, has to recover, learns a lesson. And it's these sort of stories I try to find from beginning to end out of all these desperate, differently made clips. It's like I'm making my own stories.
Do you ever use music to sort of dictate the way you want to visually present, or is it always visual first and music later?
For me, it's visual first and story first. And then once I lay that down, and it's cohesive, often I'll say, here's a rough thing, give me a sense of music. But, music is critical. And having working with my son and with a library of music, but it's, because we're making a movie. And so music is like it's not just a soundtrack, it's like a narration that underscores what you do. So it's critical. And I don't claim that's my true expertise. So I rely on editors and people like Noah to add that element to it.
How do you think documentaries and visual art plays a role in promoting or marketing a sport?
Well, I mean, as I think in terms of paydirt, and it's not exactly the answer to your question, but it's a thought that came to mind. So if I may, is we have these interviews and they're very in depth, and like I said, we pull out the emotion, but the visuals, kind of like in a magazine, the pictures in a sense, I want to create a cinematic experience that is in parallel to that. And in this case, when we went to the races, well, first we had a big problem. The early footage of Supercross racing is terrible. It was standard def. It was poorly shot. It was low budget. It was they were a live event property that had TV. And the attitude in those days was, we're running a live event. You guys get up and put your cameras up and stay out of our way. They were not making a show. They were putting on a ticket selling event. NASCAR was the same. Look at early NASCAR footage. It is terrible. Yeah. So I wanted to find a way, how do I capture visuals that don't exist? So what we did was two things. I went and shot a lot of footage with my DP and said, I want to feel the dirt. I want to feel the type of angles you will never see either from the stands or from television, and that really capture it. So it's a cinematic experience. And then we had a big problem. We have Bob Hanna talking about his story, or Jeremy McGrath. And again, we didn't have the footage to really support it. We did get lucky. We do have a guy, David Dewhurst. I don't know if you know David. He's a still photographer. He's phenomenal.
Yeah, I know.
And we used about 50 or 60 of his photos. So that was great to put still photos in there. Yeah. But as I was building the pieces, even once we were on track with our direction, I was first forcing the editor, I don't care how bad the footage is. They're talking about this race in 1996. I want that footage. And the guy said, let's try putting in modern footage. And I thought, oh, this is going to be terrible. It actually works brilliantly because when you hear the guy talking about, I tried to take him out, we have footage of modern people taking people out. Yeah. And I didn't give enough credit to the audience. And the audience, not a single person has said to me, what's that modern footage doing when Bob Hanna's talking about him and Brock Glover? Right. People just accept it in the documentary filmmaking way. Mm-hmm. And the only other plug I would give is, because we spent so much time on these visuals, and I mean, we went to race after race, moved cameras around, all red cameras, and the highest possible quality. Mm-hmm. I think seeing this movie in the movie theater, because I edited it for a long, long time, a couple of years basically by the time we went. Yeah. And all I ever saw it was either on my phone when I was looking at a clip or on a computer monitor. The first time I saw it in a movie theater, I was like, holy cow. When this guy's flying through the air and the dirt is flying, and then Noah did some of the sound design of the clicking of the gears, the dirt, the engines, the motor. Because I always say, you're not really trying to capture reality. You're trying to augment reality, to sort of take reality and make it cinematic. So when I saw it on the big screen, it kind of blew me away, and it's in movie theaters now. So I really recommend, if you want to experience paydirt, go to a movie theater. It's going to blow you away.
Yeah. When's the official launch date?
There's a couple in theaters right now, but January 20th is when it begins rolling out. Okay. If you go to paydirtthemovie.com and click on screenings, it's in about 200 movie theaters around the country and the world right now, rapidly expanding. We'll end up at 300 to 400 over the next couple of months. So you'll have opportunities to go see it.
Awesome. You mentioned you had worked with different brands to create this movie. So Monster obviously is one of the, and Feld obviously as well. Yeah. What's the balance that you sort of have to manage when want to tell your story, but also make sure that your clients are happy?
I'll tell you a funny story about that, and it actually involves Noah. So one time we were looking for something to do some weekend, and I thought, let's go ride off-road vehicles up in the high desert. So we went off to I forget, where did we go when we did that racing? Side-by-sides?
Somewhere in Inland Cal. It was like
Riverside, up there.
Like 4 or 5 hours north of here.
Yeah, and so we're out there in the desert, and I get this panicked phone call from Feld that Kenneth Feld has finally heard about our project, and he wants to do a call right now to find out what we're doing. And I'm covered in dust. We're staying in some flea bag motel. One of those little towns up in the high desert there. And I have to do this phone call. And they go, and not only do I have to do a phone call, there's like all the executives from Feld are on the call, and Kenneth Feld himself is on the call. And he's known as a tough guy, runs the circus. Promoters like Mike Goodwin, he's cut out of that vein. I wasn't good at that. That's why I was a bad promoter when I promoted, try to sell tickets. And I was really scared because, was he going to try to, make this thing antiseptic, that nobody gets hurt? It's all nicey. And I was really relieved when I said, look, I'm going to tell the honest story. I go, look, I understand. I'm smart. I've been around enough to know I have a brand to protect. I'm not here to trash something. But on the other hand, people get hurt. People crash. It's not a happy deal. It's a business. And I said, this is the story I'm here to tell. And I literally said, I don't know how to do it otherwise. I don't know how to make this into not Alice in Wonderland, but Cinderella or whatever. This is motorcycle racing. Yeah. Gravity doesn't change. And, you guys know better than anybody what's involved in this sport. And he was a little bit like, okay, I'm going to give you a chance. Mm-hmm. Now, the great thing about Monster is, and I've worked for them for many years now, over 16 years. I've been making all forms of different content. Yeah. The people, and Monster is a unique company in that it's not driven by brand people. It's driven by sports people. The sports marketing people run it. They know exactly what this sport is and what the appeal, that authenticity is the thing. And they go, look, Paul, you're the filmmaker. Mm-hmm. We sell drinks. Yeah. We're going to have some input. Yeah. And, you have to sort of walk a line. And that was also when I mentioned the problems. They were both in the back of my mind. I don't want to piss them off. And then until Josh said, screw them, make your movie. And so they both ended up, I said, look here, and I go, I'm putting a criminal in this thing. This is opening with a double murder. And, maybe that reflects badly on your sport. I go, but this is how it has to be. And, because one of the nice things about experience is people go, okay, you've done other movies. Your reputation precedes you. We're going to trust you. And when I sent it off to Feld, and I prefer to sit in a room when I show people for the first time, but it was during COVID. And so it was like, email it over. Right. And you're sitting there, okay. And they've been great. And Monster was the same thing. I said, look, these people crash. This is what happens. Jimmy Button tells his story. Could I have made it darker? Yeah, there's some darker things, but I was also celebrating the sport. I mean, I understood that's part of what I was doing, but I didn't shy away from the fact that there is a challenge to this sport. And so, there's a balance involved. People are paying the bills. But I have to say, on both Feld's part and Monster's part, they wanted an authentic movie, and they're both happy with it. So that's great.
I also just have to interject that night when all this happened, just a few hours prior, his ATV almost toppled over in the dark in the mountains, and he could have died. So he lived through that, and then all this happened.
It's true. The guy was waving, and I didn't have my glasses on, and Noah was with him. I was behind him on this really steep climb, and he was telling me to go like this, because I didn't see it, to get into 4-wheel drive.
Oh, okay.
And I thought he was just waving at me. So I'm still in 2-wheel drive, and I'm going up this hill, and they're up there kind of relaxed because they were in 4-wheel drive. And I'm fishtailing up this with a cliff on either side, and I'm like panicked over this thing. And then I have to go make this phone call with all these Feld people on there. So,
but you saved it though.
I saved it and I made it up the hill.
Very eventful evening.
That's awesome. That's great. It's you've done some surfing clips too, obviously.
I have done,
So the Eddie just happened about a month ago, right?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on? I mean, first of all, that event that just a couple weeks ago was pretty epic, wasn't it?
They got some good surf.
Yeah. What was it like creating that movie?
That was a very, very interesting project. It was the first project I did with Josh as well.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't want to do it at first. He goes, I'm a terrible narrator. I don't want to do this.
He's great, by the way.
He's
great in paydirt.
Yeah. He's just amazing. That movie was really educational. It was a difficult movie because Eddie is so revered. So I'll tell you a quick story. So we're going over there, and we're in the Honolulu airport, and we're changing planes to go to to the Big Island, to meet Sal Aikau.
Mm-hmm.
We get there and they go, hey, and he's supposed to meet us in this cafe. He doesn't have a cell phone. We're there and they go, your flight's been canceled. You have to wait 2 hours for the next little hopper over there. Mm-hmm. I go, look, I can't do that. I got Sal Aikau waiting in a coffee shop over in the Big Island. And they go, what? Sal Aikau? They called a plane back from the runway to get us on the plane. And then I go, wait a second, this is not just a surfer guy. I mean, I knew it was more than that.
Right.
But as we talked to people, we had a woman at the hotel we stayed at come and hug us. You're telling Eddie's story. I mean, he's so revered over there. Yeah. There was this huge sense of responsibility. This is a key figure in Hawaiian cultural history. And they're real people. He passed away, but Clyde, Myra, and Sal, and all the people who loved him. So it was a sense of responsibility that I'm telling a really, really important story. Mm-hmm. And the scary part about that was, when you start doing these movies and you start looking for truth and what really happened, you don't know what you're going to find. And we think, God, I hope Eddie was really a good guy as he was. Because what if we hear, but he was better than advertised.
That's great.
It was great. And the story came out and had its own challenges because the family was so poor. There weren't a lot of photos to tell a lot of the archival stuff. But I really came to this day. I kind of have a little bit of a Hawaii pass when I go over there to surf or hang out. Mm-hmm. You're the guy who made the Eddie movie. Yeah. And to be part of that history. And Josh is very grateful for that as well. And to see the contest still going on. It's had its turmoil from a sponsorship standpoint. Mm-hmm. But it's happening. It was great. The surf was great. And it's something I'm really, really proud of to have done that movie.
Do you ever go back to Hawaii to go see the tournament happen?
I didn't go this year, but I have gone to previous years when they ran. I also flew up one year where they flew over when they didn't run it, but they were going to run it. And I'm there on the beach. There was the almost Eddie, they call it. Mm-hmm. But I'm still friendly with the family. I still speak to Clyde occasionally. The movie's kind of an evergreen movie because, the story is what it is. Yeah. Quicksilver was behind that, and then it was an ESPN 30 for 30. Mm-hmm. It was also kind of gratifying. We won of the 2 Emmys I've won. It was one of the Emmy Awards I won for that. And it's just meant so much to me. And on a personal level, Eddie making the right choices in life and making that sacrifice has kind of been inspiring to me. And one thing I really should mention is for the Eddie movie and for Blink of an Eye and for Paydirt, my wife, his mother, Susan Cooper, is my producing partner. Right. And it's really wonderful because I'm a little bit of a gearhead or a surf head, and I kind of get caught sometimes in, oh, that's so cool. And and she'll come and go, I don't know what you're talking about here. Where's the humanity? Where's the story? Forget about how you're in love with waves or speed is cool. She brings us back to earth. Keep the story. And I do try to always put a lot of women as much as I can in my movies because they bring a different tonality to documentaries. But I really have to give my wife a lot of credit for adding dimension to the films. I don't get caught up in my gearheadness or my sports side.
how do you think, women or, partners of the main, protagonist or the subject, how do partners bring that different perspective?
It's
to the
critical.
story?
It's absolutely critical. People, and one of the people in Paydirt, who actually Paul Fanner has talked about, who's a key part of Paydirt, is Eric Johnson, who writes a lot for your magazine.
Yes.
And, people are not often fully self-aware for one reason or another, either through denial, maybe just a lack of understanding. They don't really appreciate their accomplishments because they were there. Having someone like Eric Johnson, or in our case, also Davey Coombs, who can bring that outsider's perspective, or in Ricky Johnson's case in Paydirt, about Ricky and his father, which is a key part of all motorsports, because you need no little kid's going to get in a car or a go-kart by himself.
Yep.
Whereas in skating or surfing, they can kind of do it on their own.
Right.
But Ricky's wife, who, says, and, I can repeat it because she goes, Ricky's father was an abusive alcoholic. Now, Ricky couldn't say that about his dad. He just couldn't bring himself to say it, even though he knew it, and he kind of talks around it. So particularly with a wife who's like, hey, I experienced this. He was a bad guy in many respects. And so bringing in someone to talk about someone, and frankly, the fun part about having Josh Brolin is, as a writer, I can write any line I want to sort of punctuate what I want from my perspective, and then I get someone like Josh Brolin to say the words. So you want that 30,000, that God voice. And Eric in Paydirt is really critical. He knows the sport, he understands it, and is very emotional as well as extremely knowledgeable. So having that third party commenting on it is critical.
Yeah, those interviews with Eric in the film are really, really critical, I think, in telling that story. And sometimes when you're the actual guy on the bike, it's hard you're in the moment so much. So when you're asked about like what happened during those days or whatnot, it's hard to tell that story. Sometimes it's the person that's watching you better at expressing, what you're actually going through.
Absolutely. Like in Blink of an Eye, a guy named Ken Martin, who worked for NASCAR for many years, he really helped explain that Michael, what he did on that last lap, more than Michael could express himself. So having a knowledgeable person who has credibility adds authenticity. And the other thing as a director is, with someone like Eric, I could sort of nudge him in a direction. Here's kind of what I need you to talk about. And the right person will hear you and go, oh, okay. And they'll sometimes use your words. And so, but that interaction is really what a director does. People go, what do you mean you directed a documentary? What did you direct? Well, you're shaping the story. You're editing it in your mind while you're asking the questions.
Yeah, no, definitely. You've done other, you've also worked with CJ Oliveris, who's a friend of Racer too, on Fuel TV and a bunch of his projects. I think I read somewhere or heard somewhere you did this crazy show in Indonesia, right? Mentawai.
I did a show many years ago for Fuel TV. It was in the early days of reality TV, and it was in 2000 and 2001. We did it for 2 years. We took a bunch of surfers, put them on a boat in the Mentawai Islands, and we had a contest where they eliminated each other and day after day. And the whole contest was run on boats. And we had an elimination contest with all the best surfers in the world, except for Kelly Slater. He didn't come, but we had Shane Dorian and all the top women, Kiala Kennelly, and the women's side, who's a project I'm going to be working on in the future, actually.
Oh, great.
I'm very excited about as a new project that I'm developing. And the surfing world is kind of the foundation of what I've done, but have segued into motorsports.
Yeah, that's even before like reality TV even existed, right? You kind of invented it then.
I wouldn't say invented, but I was there and took a lot of those hints. Because again, that was one where I created Surfer Magazine was like, hey, we want OP, the brand said, we got to do something different. They brought me in and I said, well, let's have a contest on boats, and we never touched land, and it's got the romance of boats. And 1 year, just as an aside, we're out in the Mentawais, and the captain and people decided to drink a few Bintang beers. And they have these storms because you're right on the equator. And so instead of having prevailing winds, you get these little mini tornadoes. In the middle of the night, when everybody was laying on couches and whatnot, as you can imagine, with a bunch of surfers, a storm came in and the boat went up on the reef, and it almost sank.
Oh, wow.
And we got stuck out there, and they had to go underneath the boat and rescue it. So we had quite a high seas adventure that year.
Oh, man. It's been A lot of adventures in your life. What other? Just going back to paydirt.
Yeah.
You said one of your the biggest challenges was finding footage from back then, and you had to work with that. But what other challenges did you face creating this movie?
The big thing was, since once I threw out a linear structure, I go, now what's my structure? How do I put these pieces together, knowing I could have Josh to be the connective tissue, and then picking the stories. And then I said, I've got to find a way to show the whole world of Supercross without a specific through line, and to somehow keep the tension there. And so it was finding really powerful stories that were self-contained, yet somehow I could connect. So for example, Loretta Lynn's is a section in the movie. And until you've experienced Loretta Lynn's, and I'm sure it's true in a lot of motorsports, maybe in go-karting on your way up there, I mean, there are 3- and 4-year-old kids, and I'm not exaggerating, who are racing for contracts. And I have his oldest brother, was a professional soccer player. So I thought, as a soccer parent, I'd seen what parents were like. I did not experience the motorsports parent. But I wanted to tell that story honestly, without going overboard, but showing these a little bit over the top parents, the pressure. And what was beautiful about that, we got lucky. Luck plays a big role in everything you do. Well, Brian Deegan, his son at the time was at Loretta's. So I got an interview with Brian about, who is now Danger Boy, now the biggest star in the sport, ostensibly. But also Brian's story fit in because Brian was the last privateer to win a Supercross race, which was, I think, 1997.
Yeah, long time.
When he ghost rode the bike, which was kind of extraordinary. That's the last privateer.
Yeah.
So here you have Brian, who creates the sport of Supercross. Now he has his son, and he says in the movie, this is the most satisfying moment of his life, was his son's success.
Yeah.
And that kind of ends the movie. So it kind of, and back in the Coliseum where Mike Goodwin did the first ever race. Right. So I was able to create a structure where there really was no structure, but you do feel you went from that first Coliseum race to the Outdoor Nationals and Supercross combining together to create Super Motocross, and then the son of this rebel who couldn't get a factory ride, who was kind of a bad boy, his son goes on to win, become the world champion. So it kind of all kind of fits together in a movie, because you're making a movie, and you got to give people that experience.
Yeah, no, his son is killing it now. I mean, right? When were you shooting this movie?
We shot it about 2 years ago. Most of the interviews were done it was kind of, we started at the beginning of COVID, then we had to stop because, my style is in a studio, kind of like this one, and you can't put 10 people in a tight room like that, as you can recall, during the COVID days. So we had to stop, then we had to pick up again. I have to say, particularly for Monster, because, they were the main financial backer, they were really patient. Because they're like, hey, Paul, the accounting department's asking, when are we going to start seeing this movie, and how do we account for this? And I go, not done yet, sorry. Yeah. And they said, okay. And they knew that I wasn't slacking. Right. Part of it was COVID. Part of it was, like I said, I had to change structure. And I really give credit to Mitch Covington, who's the head of all sports marketing, David Gowland, and also Sam Pontrelli from Monster. Those key. And the other one is Mark Hall, who created the brand. Right. And he was really supportive. And Mark Hall, Rodney Sachs, and Sam, they don't have a big part in the movie, but I put them in because they were so respectful, and the sport's so important to them. And there wouldn't be what it is without Monster.
Yeah, yeah. How important do you think action sports is for a brand like Monster? I mean, they're getting into other sports, and they're even into esports and things like that. But, I feel like Supercross is just like what almost defines them. But how important do you think that relationship is?
Well, I think we can bifurcate action sports and motorsports. And it says in the movie, and Rodney Sachs, who's the chairman and founder of the company, he says, this sport defines our brand. We made them better. They made us better. And he said, more than any other sport, and you're talking about the most successful private equity company and the energy drink business and so on, that it was and the thing that's magical, it's kind of mysterious. Supercross is really a pretty small sport in the scheme of things. Yeah. But yet Monster built its brand just on the authenticity of the badass guys on motorcycles, that iconic concept. Even though it doesn't have the reach of the NFL, Supercross represents what Monster stands for. It does to this day. So that's why they supported this. And I will also, just to give them credit, they backed blink of an eye of a story that took place in 2001 when Monster barely existed. But they said, hey, we're part of the sport. We want to give back to the sport. They don't do it for financial reasons, I can tell you that. So they sometimes they feel like, hey, we want to support the sports we're in from a storytelling perspective.
Noah, so while Paul makes the long form, films, when do you start thinking about, okay, this part could be, good for a clip, or how do you approach that?
So usually when I start making the clips for social media, the project is either in like a 2/3 of the way rough draft state or almost complete. Like a lot of the clips I made over the last week was actually cut straight from the final product. So I sort of have the privilege of usually having the complete story put together and knowing what I need to go for, what individual clips I need to sell. Some of them are also so well made by the final draft that I only need to make a few adjustments in the individual segments. So normally what I'll do is I'll watch through the entire movie, maybe a couple times, and I'll think, okay, what are the most important parts? Which conveniently for this movie in particular, Paydirt, there's each of the vignettes is actually divided by like a dramatic drum hit and a big text on screen that's like boop, like the screen fades to black and it's boom, the privateer, or boom, the dirt. Right. I really like the dirt. And so in the initial cuts, that made it really easy. Oh, wow, perfect. It doesn't even need the context of what came before because each of these tell their own story. So this was one of the most rewarding clips to cut.
When we think about, social media, I love telling the behind the scenes stories, and I love getting stories like from you after what was involved in the thought process of creating this scene, for example, or what was the biggest challenge, what was all these things that are going through the director or the producer's minds, and all that stuff is great for social media, I think. Are you like shooting behind the scenes stuff while the main film is being made?
If I'm not doing that, someone else is always doing that. We have archives of development stuff. So sometimes it's like if someone else is already doing the edits, I'll take over behind the scenes footage. Now, it's up to the director, obviously, if we just choose to use any of that. But like we usually just try to archive as much as we possibly can. And we have hard drives stuffed under the house. Sometimes we'll even dig something up 3 years later. That's actually how I got one of my songs and one of the other older projects, the one about Michael Waltrip, Blake Van I actually wrote a song like 4 years prior to the cut being, and last minute before the final edit, they just needed a song for that segment. It was like, hey, I wrote this thing 4 years ago and I never used it, but I think it would work perfectly. So I literally dug the sheet music out from under the house and then put it on the computer.
Nice. Paul, how do you think a media brand like Racer can get into more visual storytelling?
So that's a complicated question. I'm not sure I have an easy answer. I think you have to separate it from the magazine. It's a different medium, a complementary medium. I think it's a strategic question. Like, what do you want to achieve by that? It's easy to make content with cameras, iPhones, and so on. But what's your goal? And is it a revenue goal? Is it a supporting goal? Is it a lead goal? I think those are questions that I don't think I can answer, but I think you need to ponder, like, how do you maximize? Like, the podcast is perfect because it brings the magazine kind of alive, or in this case, Paul wrote a lovely article, which, by the way, I just have to say, he was the first person to see the movie outside of the people who made the movie. And I was really nervous, because like I said, I put this kind of weird amalgam together. His words, I was like really crying. And I went to my wife and I said, you got to read this. And it just validated me. And Josh kind of laughed. He goes, I told you it would be okay. Of course, it's exactly what you did. And the fact that someone like Paul Fanner was so kind and so thoughtful, and it was a guy who knows, not even just a viewer, but who lived and knew these people. I really have to thank him. It changed my whole mood. It gave me so much confidence to go out in the world and go, you know what? Because you really never know. You just don't know what people are going to say. And his words and his confidence and something like Racer and his credibility and authenticity and everything, I'm so grateful. It really, really meant a lot to this day. And then for him to continue to support it, to have us here. It's funny, you toil for so long in these dark rooms, sitting there with that back and forth, try this, try that, this. It's a very laborious process. And you in your mind, you go, I can't wait till someone sees this. And Paul was the first person we showed it to, and his positive reaction has set this movie off. He really was the launch pad for everything that's followed. And it gave me the confidence to go, if Paul Fanner was kind about it, I could really stand up and go, you know what? It's okay. And that's really helped me. So I'm really, really, truly, deeply grateful. In terms of answering your question, I would say, think of it as something different, something that has to exist in a parallel world because it has its own rules. It can cross over, but it also has to exist as if Racer Magazine didn't exist. And then you get into a lot of questions of short form, long form, and how that works. So I would say, think of it, the difference, and someone said this to me, you don't learn from movies. You have emotions from movies. You learn from reading. That's why you have to have books. And Racer Magazine, in reading, the human brain absorbs things in an intellectual and emotional process through the written word. But the visual medium, you don't really learn very much, but you have emotion. So if you're going to take something in Racer and put it in a visual medium, make it so it works in that medium, that it's emotional and not data-filled. But so anyway, that's the difference. So find stuff that has a visual element, that really has a reason to be visual.
I see.
Hope that's helpful or not.
No. That's great. I mean, I think Racer has to maintain to be authentic and credible, and stick to storytelling, good storytelling, which I think the brand has established itself. Up until now, and just going back to what you were saying about how nervous you were before showing it to Paul, you're not the first creative person that's come here and said that you basically need courage to create something, right? Because you're putting your heart out there with this product, and it takes balls to have someone look at it and critique it, right? Do you think courage is necessary for creatives?
I think you need recklessness, which is a form of courage, I guess. At some point, you have to just say, I'm making this damn movie, and it's going to be what it's going to be. And it does take some kind of a boldness of, but the key thing in these movies is, I'm not the movie. I'm the conduit. I'm not the subject matter. One of my favorite characters in the movie is Bob Hanna, and he's hilarious in this movie. He was one of the great gets. He was the last one that we really needed to finish the movie, and Mark Hall kind of made it possible, made some donations and reached out personally. And the great thing about Bob is he didn't give a hoot. He was like, I don't need to be in your movie. I sell airplanes now. I have my own life. My ego doesn't need it. And he actually helped us get Marty Tripes, who won that first race that was put on at the Coliseum. So it actually takes a combination of, yes, some boldness, but it takes real humility. I am not the story. I am just, and you want people when you're interviewing them I've been sort of people, I ask questions that are kind of dumb questions, but are designed to elicit a response. I once worked with a director where I was a producer, and he couldn't stop talking about himself. I go, you got to ask more basic questions. He goes, I can't do that. They'll think I don't know. I go, they don't care what you think. It's not about me. And if you can make the subjects realize, I want to know what they're thinking, that they have to be the courageous one. I'm just asking questions. They're the ones who lived it, and they're the ones who are exposed. And that means you put your ego completely aside. Yet at the same time, you need to have a pretty strong ego to say, here's how I'm going to shape this, and to have the courage to do it. And it took me a while to find my way on paydirt. Other movies have been easier. This was a hard one.
I mean, it turned out great, though. I loved the movie. It's very engaging. I really recommend, if you're a fan of, Supercross, obviously, I think you need to go see it for sure. But even if you're not, if you're a fan of action, if you're a fan of great stories, right? And everybody's a fan of great stories, I think. And that's why, films are engaging, right?
That was my hope, is that if you're a Supercross fan, it should be a love letter. Someone gets what I've been experiencing. And I hope the fans think that. And if you're someone who's not a fan of even sports, when you have a story of Ricky Johnson talking about making peace with his father, Ricky Carmichael talking about his mother's haranguing him to greatness.
Right.
You know, getting to greatness is not an easy path. And Ricky says, I was miserable as a kid. I didn't have the childhood my friends had because of his mother, Meanie Jeannie. And it was kind of scary, by the way, because I knew that was her nickname. And I sat down, I thought, I'm going to take this head on. And I go, and what do you think about this nickname? She goes, oh, you're calling me out on Meanie Jeannie. And I didn't know how she was going to, it was the first question I asked. And I thought, she's going to kick me out of her house. But she was great. She embraced it. She kind of liked it. And so those types of stories have nothing to do with sports. They have to do with humanity. And that's what I try to do, is hopefully balance both those things.
Yeah. How do you get, the Ricky Carmichaels, the Jeremy McGraths, and Brian Deegans to open up to you, though? How do you do that?
Well, I think you have to show them you're a serious person. And you have to be knowledgeable. You have to have done your research. So when you don't want to ask, you can easily get things go off track if you say something that's just too dumb. Yeah. You have to be knowledgeable. I think you have to be respectful. And the real secret, and we talked about it a little bit, is listening. And what you're listening for is not what they're saying. You're listening for what they are thinking or feeling, but not saying. Like, the worst question you can ask is, what did you think about it? A better question is, what did you feel about it? Because you want the brain to go away from thinking to feeling. And if you get Jimmy Button talking about what was it like to lay on the ground and not be able to move. The other thing about the technique of these movies, and I learned it when I did from Stacy Peralta, the famous filmmaker who did Riding Giants, and I did it in Unchained, is you want to bring it back into the present, as if you're there right at that moment. And so Jimmy recreates that moment. And it's not like television. TV is talk, B-roll. This is like we are immersing back into it. That's the technique of filmmaking, is you're back there in real time. Even though you can see Jimmy's talking, he obviously recovered at some level, but the magic is making you feel like you're there in real time.
What do you mean by it's different from TV, where someone's speaking and you have B-roll and what you do?
Yeah, television, there's two things. One thing, when you make a movie, your relationship to the viewer is, in television, you're fighting commercials, and in social media, you're fighting the next swipe.
Yeah.
You have in movie making, and it's really wonderful, actually. You're saying, hey, someone has either paid money or committed to 90 minutes or 2 hours of their time. So I don't have to hook them. I don't have to trick you into getting to that first commercial and coming back. You're going to sit down, and if you're not into it, you're not going to watch my movie. I can't convince you. Because it's a movie, the pacing is, let me pull you in. Let's be respectful of each other. I'm respectful of your time, but I'm not rushing. You're going to have to engage with me. So once you can settle in with that rhythm, whereas that's not television. Television, and I've done television, like in Mav TV, I just did a piece. We have a piece coming out on Johnny Greaves and his family in a couple of weeks, which was a great weekend out of Crandon. I know you have that first commercial break, and I got to get you there and get you to come back after that break. I don't have that. But I have to be respectful. I'm asking for 2 hours of your time, but I can now take my time getting into it. So we tease Mike Goodwin coming in here. We don't solve the problem. Mike Goodwin doesn't come back into the movie to the third segment later on. Right. But that's okay. Hopefully I can keep you interested enough to stay there and to keep going. So that's the difference. The other thing is, in television, it's very much person talks, slap B-roll on top of it. I'm creating scenes. I am making a movie. I want to engage you emotionally on multiple levels, which is music and pacing. And that's like what Noah was saying, is Jimmy Button's segment is maybe 8 or 10 minutes, 12 minutes. He had to capture that in 90 seconds. So he has to reconfigure it, which is completely different, which is, by the way, I don't do that. I'm glad I have someone like Noah, because I don't think that way. I want to take my time and build something that's really theatrical and cinematic.
Right. So you're approaching movies more from the script and the story, right? And then Noah comes in and lays a track to match what you're saying. How about the visual aspect of it?
Sorry to interject on that point, because while I do it sometimes like that, a lot of the music I make is actually preemptive. I'll actually just be given a prompt, like I'll be given the background on the movie, like that it's an intense motocross or supercross film, and I'm thinking, okay, while the movie's being developed, I don't want to wait as long as possible to get a head start. So I'm thinking, all right, let's make a song with some of the stuff people would expect. Electric guitars, intense percussions, and I'll design a piece. That's like for the piece I did for The Dirt, I designed a song for that clip preemptively because I thought, oh, this epic, almost cybernetic rock and roll thing, because I tried to get a sort of mechanical feel. Well, if I don't know what scene will be used for, but I know it will be used for a scene. But going back to the Jimmy Button clip, because like those are the more hyper-specific things that I might not know about until the movie is further in development. And that is closer to what you said. I look at the clip, I get some feedback from my father, and then I develop something that is designed to match for the visuals. Right. I'll even try to time the specific downbeats of the song itself to what's on screen, and obviously I'll pick instrumentation that match. So I went with the piano because that's always emotional, and you can do so much with that.
Right. So there are various ways to come up with the track that would go with the scene. You don't necessarily have to watch the entire thing, or you can go from preemptive like concepts.
Well, I mean, it's both. To be real, it's like you have to make music preemptively and then after the fact.
Yeah.
To answer your question, it's a real duality. Mm-hmm. There's this interviews and story, but I think that my signature also is the way the lighting is set for the interviews. Mm-hmm. I want it to look very dramatic. I've done different types of sets. When we did Unchained, I built a giant motorcycle like collage, mobile almost with motorcycles hanging from the sky. This one, because so much took place on the dirt and in stadiums, I wanted a very clean kind of interview setup. But then the visuals are so important, whether it's archival, still photos, or in our case, we went and shot. And I said to my DP, you have to have a relationship. It's kind of like you have an art director. I want this feeling. I go, look, this is about a sport that takes place on dirt. The name of the thing has dirt in the title. I want to feel the dirt, and I want to see what you don't see on television. It's not, because we're going to have TV footage in here. So I want to see people's eyes. I want to see their hands. I want to see that sense of, when a guy goes through a berm, it's a beautiful thing. When the guy flies through the air. And so then you end up with this dual track of here's someone talking about an experience, and then there's this visual that hopefully is cinematic and beautiful. And that's, again, why it's not television. Television sort of, and again, nothing against TV. I make TV. Right. But I'm trying to add layers of complexity to it, which most people feel emotionally. They don't even understand why they're feeling a depth of thing. Yep. And when you watch, and again, that's why I say watch this thing on the big screen, and you see this motorcycle flying 80 feet through the air. And when someone says, this is when these guys rest. I mean, that was the other thing about this sport is what I wanted to come, because when I came to the first race, I was sitting on the floor in Anaheim, and I said, I need to make a movie about this. I didn't know that, because look, it's a motorcycle, so there's a motor and there's a seat. So how hard could this sport really be? Because you're sitting down and all you have to do is go like this. Couldn't be further from the truth. Their average heartbeats, which this famous guy named Dr. G talks about in the movie, they average between 180 and 200 beats a minute for 22 minutes, 3 times. Think of a boxer. Right. Yeah, it's intense, but they get a minute rest every 3 minutes. A football player, they play for 10 seconds maybe, then they get to rest and walk around. In Supercross, 22 minutes at 200 beats a minute. Yeah. That is extra. Soccer players don't do that. I don't think there's another sport. And on top of that, your body is being slammed. These guys are next to you. And here's the thing about this sport that hopefully also comes through is it's a cutthroat sport. These are gladiators. They are beating and bashing. You're taking the lunch money out of someone's hands in that turn. Yeah. And one of the fun segments is about rivalries and how the guy on your team, because in motorsports, as you know, your teammate has the same equipment. Yeah. So if you lose to him, you have no excuse. You can, that Honda guy had a better motor, and you can but your teammate, you can't say that. So that the teammate is the worst possible term because he's really your biggest rival. And we have 2 great stories, and one is with Bob Hanna and Brock Glover. And there we kind of veered away from Supercross, by the way. We went into motocross, the outdoors, where Bob Hanna and Brock Glover, and it's hilarious watching these 2 guys because here's the crazy part. They still hate each other. Yeah. And to this, it's funny. Brock Glover, who saw the movie, doesn't like the movie because he's like, why did you make this about Bob? How come you didn't talk about my championships? And I said, look, Brock, you won a few races. You won a couple of titles. It's a big deal. We mentioned it. Otherwise, you wouldn't be interesting. But here you 2 guys are fighting and yelling at each other to this day. And then and Hannah says, if he walked in here this minute, I'd tell him I hate the guy right now. Yeah. And he was great. And then Jeremy McGrath is an interesting challenge as a filmmaker because he's a great guy. He's beloved. But he really wasn't controversial. He actually at one point talked about, I was kind of nice on the track because I didn't want people to, he's a nice guy. Yeah. That's not that interesting. It's just not interesting. Conflict and what people do under pressure is what drama is. Mm-hmm. So we framed it in a pretty controversial way, I think. Where it's him versus Emig. Now, Emig won 1 title and maybe a handful of races versus Jeremy won 7 titles in 72 races. But they were rivalries. So it's talking about that. So again, we've humanized it. And in that case, we came across a very interesting incident where they were in Las Vegas, the lights went out, the riders were unhappy with the sport, and they wanted to strike. Right. And Emig had never won a race. Mm-hmm. So he took the opportunity. In his mind, it was justified, and he makes his case, hey, I was getting paid, it wasn't that dangerous. Jeremy goes, he stabbed us all in the back. Right. You can decide for yourself who was right and who was wrong, but that was great material to have. Yeah. And someone said, well, that's not interesting. Jeremy wasn't in the race. I go, no, that's really interesting, that Emig wins the race when Jeremy... So anyways, that's what you look for. Yeah, that made it much more interesting than winning and losing. So those are the kind of moments you've looked for as a filmmaker.
Yeah. Because the point is not about the point is about the two being rivals and still being rivals to this day and still bickering, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
In 2025, right? So
it's how many? It's 30 years ago.
Exactly.
But to those guys, it was kind of fun how to this day it is fresh as a daisy to them. Yeah. And they were kind of scowling at each other. And though at the premiere the other night, they were getting along. And I think they finally are like Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier. Hey, we had some great battles. We respect each other. We made each other better. Mm-hmm. But Jeremy says in the movie, he wasn't my rival. He didn't beat me. I let him win. So it's kind of great that they're still.
That's the way. It's like Michael Jordan. None of those guys were my rivals, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it's great that they still have that much emotion, and the filmmaker part is to find those gems of stories that some people go, that wasn't story. No, that's really where the beauty lies in that.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. I mean, that's how you finding those stories where it's out there, but you have the ability to find those, right, and then select that and then capture that moment is a special.
I mean, Jeremy won 72 races, so we did like a little montage. I mean, what's so interesting about he dominated so much? That's not what's in there. And there were some of the great stories. One of the things I just would love to mention is Ron Lachine, who people said was the most naturally gifted racer they maybe have ever seen. Merrick Johnson talked about it at great length, and Ron poured his heart out in his interview. But his story was really about his relationship with his father, who was overbearing, who he finally pushed away. He got caught with a little bit of marijuana in Japan, lost his ride, lost his career. But it was just one of those stories that there wasn't footage to support it. There wasn't, I couldn't find anything that showed that he was this beautiful, incredible rider. I couldn't fake that with modern footage. Mm-hmm. And I thought, we're telling a father-son story with Ricky. I don't want to tell another father's. So I feel bad in particular. But Ronnie's funniest line in the interview was, he goes, I was a drug addict. And he goes, but I really like doing drugs. I just wish I had waited till my career was over and became a drug addict. It kind of ruined my career. I could have had both instead of losing my. But the story he tells of being in Japan, you got to remember, this is in the 70s, or early 80s. And he goes, I get busted in Tokyo.
You can't get busted with drugs in Japan.
And he goes, well, maybe nobody will hear about it because there's no internet in those days. Right. And it turned out Cycle News ran a little tiny article, and it came out when he was in Japan. And he tells the story of he was in Tokyo, and Narita Airport, as you probably know, is kind of outside of Tokyo. Yeah. It's not that close. Mm-hmm. He goes, I was put in the back seat of a car with Mr. Honda in the front seat. Oh my God. For 2 hours, we rode in dead silence. He personally was so embarrassed. How, Japanese culture, that he humiliated them. He goes, they made me sit in the car for 2 hours without saying a word, and he personally escorted me onto the plane to get rid of me and send me out of Japan. Oh, wow. Which is a great story. Now, it would have been a great recreation to make, right. But again, it was how do you cover that? And he tells the story, and it's really a heartfelt story. So that one didn't make it into the movie, but it was a great story, and I feel bad that we didn't get to tell Ronnie's story.
Yeah, that's a great story, though.
I'm glad we got to at least tell it here.
Right? Yeah, no, that's great. So movies it's in theaters next week.
Starting kind of now, but really 20th is when it really rolls out, and it'll be going on for the next couple of months. It hits streaming in April. Mm-hmm. So there's
where's it being streamed?
We're not sure yet. We're talking to all the streamers. I'm sure it'll be on iTunes, Amazon. Okay. We are talking to all the major brands out there, but for certainly iTunes and Amazon will be the places where it will debut, but not till April. Okay. And it will continue to be in theaters ongoing. And again, if you go to paydirtthemovie.com, under screenings. You can look it up. And look, we're looking for support because movie theaters are like, wait a second, we're going to put a movie here about Supercross, but if people ask for it and request it and it works, it'll just keep living and it's get its own life. And we really appreciate people's support because that's what it takes to get a movie like that and get this out there.
Yeah. Everybody go see it. Noah, where do we follow Paydirt on social?
Okay. You can follow it on Paydirt the Movie it's Paydirt the Movie on Instagram, on Twitter X, on YouTube, on TikTok. It's the same handle. So it's just Paydirt the Movie.
All right. Awesome. Go follow. Noah, Paul, thanks for your time. This is a great conversation. Thanks for all your insights and behind the scenes. Almost forgot. Before you go, the last question we always ask all of our guests is, what is your creative drive? Let's start with Noah.
My creative drive is that noise. Actually, I know that sounds like a joke, but it isn't, because when I was a kid, I was given two things to deal with the long car drives of my brother's soccer games: piano lessons and a Game Boy. So the piano lessons became, passion and performance and music and, expression. But that sound, that beep, that right there, it got me interested in synthetic audio, because one thing I've learned a lot from making music for video games, for myself, for clients, for my father, the composition of a song or a sound is important, but it's the sound itself that is the real key to everything. I wrote a pretty fun little lick for the dirt scene, but it's the samples that I got from like Pete LaPlay of this super intense cyber guitar. Or it's like, you think of aliens, you think of a theremin. Most people, do they even know what a theremin is? I barely do. And it's the thing with the hand.
Yeah,
and it's why I've spent so much time and financial investment in sounds, in libraries, in things I try to record myself. This might sound a little nutty, but I actually have a 4 terabyte solid state drive. I have Velcro to the back of my laptop that I just plug in. There's more storage on that hard drive than most people will have on every computer they will ever own. And it's the passion of sound that drives me. That is my creative drive.
Awesome. Thank you. Paul?
And for me, it's about the human condition. Mm-hmm. It's about, getting people to be honest and to find their truth of their emotional experience. Mm-hmm. And if you mine for that, it becomes universal and it becomes interesting. So it's just exploring the depths of feelings.
That's a great one. Well, Paul Taublieb and Noah, thank you so much for being on The Creative Drive.
It was really an honor. Thank you so much. And I want to thank Paul Fanner again.
It's our honor to have you guys on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching and listening to The Creative Drive, where we offer listeners a candid look into the minds of automotive creators and their journeys. The Creative Drive is available on all podcast platforms, and we have a bunch of awesome guests lined up for you guys, so please subscribe so you don't miss any episodes. If you're interested in partnering with us, or if you have any feedback, please email us at podcasts@racer.com. That's podcasts with an S @racer.com. The Creative Drive is produced by Racer Studios. Thanks to my producer, Molly Binks, creative director, George Tamayo, Brian Conzone, and it's edited by Andrew Snyder. I'm your host, Taro Koki. Thanks for watching again, and we'll see you soon.